A Very Dangerous Rifle by Colonel ANW Powell. There is always a thrill about the day of arrival in the jungles. Perhaps it is because the much looked forward to day has arrived at last. It is refreshing to feel that the bonds of civilization have been cast off, if only for the time being, and the sight of the jungle stirs up many thoughts and new hopes of expected thrills and adventure. I had decided to spend my Christmas leave in the jungles, and once again found myself with my Aboriginal friends at Lambda. I did not have to wait long for a thrill. A few hours after my arrival, I set out on foot with my two trackers, Darbari and Saktu, for the hills 3 miles away, mainly with the object of looking for tiger tracks. We chatted as we went along, for there was little hope of meeting any game, but when we reached a small jungle village at the foot of the hills, our attention was attracted by the alarm cries of grey monkeys on a small hill about 300 yards away. There was no mistaking from the often repeated cries that they were greatly perturbed. Quite obviously, they were being upset by some carnivorous enemy. Grey monkeys, or langurs, are the most reliable informants of all jungle animals. They seldom make a mistake and never give a false alarm. My trackers ran into the village to borrow a goat, but the goats had all been sent out to graze, and to my dismay, Darbari returned with a thin, dun-colored village dog. I am a dog lover and did not fancy the idea of using a dog as a bait, but the shikaris assured me it was the only animal available and begged me to hurry or the great chance would be gone. We ran to the foot of the hill with the dog. The monkeys were still cursing loudly, and we looked around hurriedly to find a spot for our ambush. Just inside the forest, hidden from view of the village, was a small clearing surrounded by dense jungle. It was just the very place we were looking for. Darbari and I hid ourselves behind a bamboo clump, while Saktu tied the dog to a tree stump about 25 yards from us on the other side of the clearing. Having tied the dog, Saktu ran for the village. Believing himself to be alone, the dog started making frantic efforts to free himself, and while he was doing this, the jungles resounded to the full-throated roar of a leopard. This was more than the dog could stand. He began uttering the most heart-rending yells and redoubled his efforts to free himself. Poor devil! I did feel sorry for him, but he was playing his part extremely well. The next few moments were intensely exciting. The leopard could not possibly have helped hearing the dog, and as dogs fall an easy prey while chasing monkeys in the jungle, the leopard would now leave the monkeys and turn his attention to the dog. There was no knowing, of course, which way the leopard would come. When I looked around nervously, I was horrified to find a rather attractive little pathway about a yard behind us. I was just whispering to Darbari to keep a lookout in that direction, when the dog suddenly stopped jumping about and began staring fixedly at the jungle to our left. He had spotted something we could not see, but he was quite right. A second or two later, out trotted a large leopard. But instead of making a dash for the dog, as I had expected, he seemed in no hurry, and, what was more, actually stopped in the middle of the clearing to sum up the situation. He seemed astonished that the dog had not run away. That would have been the time to bowl him over, but the bamboos prevented me from swinging my rifle. Then he lolloped forward leisurely towards the dog. To make quite sure of getting in a good shot, I should have waited till he had seized the dog. But who could possibly have resisted firing at such a desperate moment? The leopard, with tail held high, was about to make the fatal grab, when I fired quickly to save the dog's life. The leopard made 2 short, quick jumps straight in the air, turning towards us as he did so, and then raced past us, roaring as he went by. It all happened so quickly that I did not have time to reload my single-barrel .405 Winchester. The leopard had failed to see us, or he could have and would have made a pretty good mess of both of us. Loud grunts and growling noises were now coming from the jungle behind us. It would have been dangerous to move, and we sat like mice waiting for the noises to cease. When they did, we crept out of our hiding place and crossed over to release the dog. Like ourselves, he too had maintained a discreet silence, but now he was overjoyed to see us, and it did not take him many seconds to cover that furlong back to the village. Darbari and I followed slowly, and presently were joined by Saktu. Then we all sat down to wait a while, before starting the dangerous job before us. We had been greatly puzzled by the leisurely way the leopard had attacked the dog. Normally, leopards rush in to seize their prey. Perhaps he had already killed and eaten a monkey, and was therefore in no immediate hurry to obtain food. Half an hour later, we returned to the clearing to pick up the trail. For about 20 yards, there was no blood, but after that there were a few patches here and there, and finally a large patch and a piece of broken bone. This was where the leopard had sat down and frightened us with his grunting and growling. Beyond this spot, however, there was no blood trail whatsoever. In the circumstances, it was extremely difficult to make any headway, and although we continued to search until it was nearly dark, we failed to come up with the leopard that day. Next morning, not more than 50 yards from where we had left off the previous evening, we found him lying dead. The bullet had hit rather low, but had smashed his right shoulder. And now, behold the hand of fate. A few evenings later, while returning with a party of men along a jungle road, the little dun-colored dog was whipped off by a leopard, never to be seen again. A day or two later, I was standing on a little hillock near the forest bungalow, scanning the edge of the forest with my field glasses, when I spied two figures emerging from the jungle about a mile away. They were stepping out briskly. This was unusual because the jungle folk seldom hurry, though I must say their normal swinging gait is very misleading. They cover the ground much faster than you would imagine, and to realize this, you should try walking with them. You will find yourself having to step out. When they came nearer, and I was able to recognize my two trackers, I instinctively guessed that something important must have happened. True enough, when they reached camp, they were smiling all over their faces and announced that a tiger had killed a bait about 5 miles away. It was then about 10 o'clock. After collecting all the paraphernalia required for such an occasion, we started off with the least possible delay. It was a hot walkout, in spite of the fact that it was nearly Christmas. Before getting to the kill, we were met by the men who had tied out the buffalo bait, and they led us to a stream to show us the tracks of the tigress, who, after quenching her thirst, had followed the jungle road for 2 miles, leading to the kill. Judging by the size of her tracks, she was a very large tigress. On arrival at the kill, I was disappointed to find it lying by the side of the road, uneaten. Its neck had been broken in approved tiger fashion, and the fang marks in the neck muscles behind the ears left no doubt that the deed had been done by a tiger. It was strange, however, that the carcass had not been touched, and the only conclusion we could come to was that the tigress must have killed at dawn and had been disturbed by people using the road before she had time to feed. The jungle on both sides of the road was very dense, and as there was no knowing where the tigress could have gone to lie up for the day, we decided it would be useless trying to catch her in a beat. Sitting up over the kill was the only alternative, but the fact that the kill had been abandoned did not make this too hopeful either. However, as there was a suitable tree only a few yards away, I ordered the shikaris to start putting up a machan. It was now about 1 o'clock, and the whole jungle seemed asleep. While the men were putting up the machan, I selected a nice cool spot a few yards away and settled down to some sandwiches. My presence there would ensure that the men worked in silence. I regret to say that even some of the best shikaris do not observe the golden rule of silence while tying up a machan. But machan tying is an exasperating job which demands real skill in climbing trees, hanging onto branches like monkeys while doing the tying, and great patience to keep one's temper. The 2 or 3 helpers always have their own ideas about how it should be done, and it is difficult to refrain from taking them off when they do everything the wrong way. Now, I was being highly amused by the antics of the 3 or 4 gentlemen struggling with the small string bed poised precariously aloft in the branches of the tree. Scowls and angry gesticulations, but silence. Suddenly, the peaceful silence of the jungle was broken by the most piercing screams of a pig in distress. It is difficult to describe in words this particular kind of noise, but once heard, it cannot be forgotten. It was so loud and so near that it caused consternation amongst my men, who apparently recognized the full meaning of what they were hearing. The men in the tree scrambled hastily to the ground, and to my astonishment began running for their lives. Why they should come down from the safety of the tree to do this, I could not understand. The shikaris hurried towards me, crouching low as they peered into the jungle in the direction of the noise. In breathless gasps, they told me the tiger was killing a wild pig, and that it would therefore not return to our dead buffalo. Much against the advice of the shikaris, I decided to stalk the tiger. Followed closely by Darbari, I set off in the direction of the screams. For about half a minute, the screams continued, and then ended as abruptly as they had begun. Darbari and I had slunk forward about 100 yards, and must have been within 40 yards of our quarry when the noises ceased. The grass was waist-high, and the jungle very dense. Without any noise to guide us, we had to move very cautiously, with every nerve strained and eyes and ears wide open. Eventually, while creeping towards a small hillock from which we hoped to get a better view, Darbari stopped to test the wind. He was trickling some powdered dust through his fingers to do this, when suddenly both of us caught sight of the tiger across a small, shallow nala, only about 15 yards away. It was standing broadside on, with its flanks still heaving through its recent exertions. Its head and shoulders were behind a bamboo clump, and it was quite oblivious to our presence. I was so overjoyed when I saw this wonderful chance that I quickly raised my old .405, aimed for a lung shot, and fired. The tiger woofed twice and bounded away. To my dismay, a small sapling between me and the tiger fell in half, cut through by my bullet. I raced to the little hillock, hoping to get in another shot, but the tiger had disappeared. Some animal did dash through the grass, but strangely enough, this was not in the direction the tiger had taken. Mad with rage and disappointment, I returned to the dejected Darbari, whose looks spoke the words he dared not utter. What a frightful mess I had made of the whole thing. I must have been blind with excitement not to have noticed the small sapling in the way. Very despondently, Darbari and I now crossed over the small nala to where the tiger had been standing, and there, behind the bamboo clump, lay an enormous wild boar, stone dead. This so delighted my pork-eating companion that he practically whooped with joy, and immediately called out to Saktu and the others to join us quickly. They arrived with looks of apprehension on their faces, but when they saw the dead boar, their faces too lit up with joy. Bless that pig! The loss of the tiger now seemed a matter of complete inconsequence. Darbari and Saktu most graciously pointed to the wounds the splinters of my bullet had made in the pig, and not only in the pig but in several bamboos and another tree as well. A truly marvelous shot. Closer examination of the boar, however, disclosed that one hind leg had been broken just above the hock, and that the back of his neck had been bitten through by the tiger. To my mind, the cause of his death was not in the least due to any part I had taken in the proceedings. When the excitement subsided, we decided to form a line and walk through the grass to look for traces of blood from the tiger. Actually, we could hardly have expected to find any, and we undertook to do this more in fun than in earnest. It felt more like looking for a snipe than a tiger, but before we had gone many yards, there was a yell of fright from Saktu, who turned and bolted back. And no wonder, for there, Under a tree, only a few yards ahead, lay the tiger. We could hardly believe our eyes. It looked like a tiger lying asleep. I stopped to satisfy myself it was not breathing, and then advanced towards it with my rifle at the ready, being begged by all not to do so. But the tiger really was quite dead. There was no bullet mark on it anywhere, but it was still bleeding from its mouth and nose. Well, that was that, but Darbari was not fully satisfied. He had heard the noise of that other animal dashing away, and now insisted on going over to investigate. To allay the fears and suspicions of our readers, I must say at once that we did not expect to find another tiger lying dead. No, Darbari merely wanted to clear up the mystery of the noise we had heard. He argued that no jungle animal would have stood there while the tigress was killing the boar, and there must have been another tiger. Though we were unable to find any clue to solve the mystery, I personally think Darbari was right, and it must have been another tiger. It is well known that a big boar such as this one can stand up to a single tiger, and quite often get the better of the exchanges. This boar had been rooting about near the bamboo clump, and I rather fancy one tiger had broken his leg, hamstringing him, while the tigress had seized him by the neck. The other tiger probably spotted us approaching and slunk away, leaving the tigress to her fate. Our entry into camp that evening, with the very large tigress in one bullock cart and the enormous wild boar on another, was triumphal. I sent to the village of Lamta for a 4-gallon drum of the most vicious toddy, and I need hardly say that a very happy evening was enjoyed by all. Prohibition in those days was unknown. When we skinned the tigress next morning, we found a splinter of my bullet, no bigger than an air gun slug, embedded in her heart. When a tiger is killed, hundreds of people come long distances to see it. When they catch sight of the tiger, they fold their hands in pious reverence, then step forward and, bowing low, touch its paws with their hands. Others, especially the old and decrepit, come to beg a little tiger fat, which is considered an excellent remedy for rheumatism. Amongst the assembled crowd, I was surprised to see my old friend Jhiru of Kanha, who had just walked 7 miles to tell me a very large tiger, apparently an old acquaintance and a regular visitor, had arrived back in his jungles. Darbari and Sakhtu welcomed the news. They knew the old tiger too, but said he had once been wounded over a buffalo kill, and now absolutely refused to touch a buffalo bait. Early next morning we set out, with the day's provisions in our haversacks, prepared to walk the 14 miles there and back, and ready to spend the day in making our reconnaissance. Our luck was in. After scouting round for an hour or two, we came across fresh pug marks of the extra-large variety, leading into a patch of jungle which the shikaris said was a death trap for any tiger in a beat. All that remained to be done now was to persuade the old tiger to take a bait. My suggestion to tie out a pig was turned down by Darbari. Tigers love pork, but Darbari argued it would be useless unless I agreed to sit up over the live bait. Such a large tiger would finish off any pig, however big, at one sitting, and that would be a shameful waste of good money and a good pig. It would mean sitting up all night in hopes that the tiger would pass that way, whereas he might not come that way again for several nights. No, it would be quite useless to tie out anything but a large animal. For religious reasons, tying out a bullock was taboo. But what other large animal could we possibly find? The shikaris began an earnest conversation in their own dialect, which was Greek to me, and I could not understand what they were saying to each other. Presently, however, they turned to me and asked permission to visit the nearest village to see what they could find. I agreed and sat down on a jungle road to await their return. A couple of hours later, with broad smiles, they returned, leading a mule. What a dilapidated hat-rack he was! Every rib and practically every bone of his emaciated body was protruding. It would have delighted the heart of any veterinary officer in the army to mark him C and D, or cast and destroy. He was very old and completely worn out. On seeing him, I told the shikaris I did not think any self-respecting tiger would touch him. Taking my remark seriously, they both explained that any tiger would absolutely love to eat him. Anyway, as there was still some quiet time to spare, we allowed the old mule to graze. How he managed to even do this was difficult to understand, as his teeth were completely worn out. It stunned me I should have to pay a fabulous price for such a bag of bones. I had always hated the idea of tying out a live bait. To me, it seemed grossly unfair. I argued with myself that it was a practice that had come down through the ages and was the accepted means of baiting tigers, but I disliked it all the same. The first time I sat up over a live goat, the wretched thing bleated so pitifully that I got down from my tree, untied it, and led it home, much to the disgust of my shikaris. Now, hardened by experience, I watched the old mule being tied to the stake. Here, I must explain that tigers, unlike lions, hunt by sight and hearing, and have practically no sense of smell. Putting out a dead bait is quite useless. It would have to be in a high state of decomposition before a tiger would realize it was there. This is an undoubted drawback, which leaves one with no other alternative except the live bait. Many have argued that this is not as cruel as it seems, and that the end justifies the means, for it brings to book a tiger who kills thousands of animals during his career. Nevertheless, it is a practice of which I have never really approved. At dusk, we tied him to a tree stump, and as we turned to return to camp, the monkeys on a nearby hill could be heard shouting their curses at some hated foe. When a scout went out in the morning, the old mule was gone. The rope was broken, and there was blood, a drag, and the tracks of a big tiger in the sand. Accompanied by the shikaris, I hurried to the spot. Very eagerly we followed the drag, which for the first 100 yards followed the course of a dry riverbed, but then the cunning old tiger had dragged his kill up a steep bank into some very tall elephant grass. I followed the drag some little distance into the very tall grass until my heart failed me. Monkeys in the vicinity were sitting in the treetops, uttering their alarm cries from time to time. "Tiger! Tiger! Beware! Beware!" Obviously, the old tiger was near at hand and might easily have turned nasty. Abandoning the idea of finding the kill also meant abandoning the idea of sitting up over it, which, for economic reasons, would have suited me better. There was no alternative now but to have a beat. 3 or 4 men were sent post-haste to the neighboring villages to collect beaters, but returned a couple of hours later to say it was a market day and everyone had gone to the bazaar at Lamta, 8 miles away. No one was expected to be back before 4 o'clock in the afternoon. This was shattering news. At about 3 o'clock, however, beaters started assembling, arriving in 2s and 3s, until by about 4 o'clock we had collected over 100 men. Darbari now split them into 2 parties, keeping about 45 men as stops and reserving the rest for the beat. In silence, the beaters were placed on their starting line, and then we started putting the stops up trees on the right flank of the beat, following a line leading up to my machan, which was in the apex of a wide V, and Darbari then led the remaining stops along the other flank, putting the stops up trees one by one until he joined up with the beaters, thus completely ringing in the tiger. It was the first time I had seen this done and was most interested. When all was ready, it was Darbari's duty to give the first shout as a signal for the beat to begin. Unfortunately for me, the men who had been entrusted with putting up my machan had placed it only about 7 feet from the ground, well within easy reach of an angry tiger, and now, at the 11th hour, there was no time to make any alterations. While I was waiting alone for the beat to begin, a leopard began roaring on the hills behind me. He roared 3 or 4 times, but his was the only voice disturbing the jungles. And then, suddenly, Darbari's signal heralded an outburst of fiendish yelling that literally shook the jungles. The beat had begun. What a wonderful sound. I waited, feeling almost sick with excitement. But hardly had the beaters uttered more than a few yells when I heard the quick tap, tap, tap of a stop on my right, followed almost immediately by the next, and then a truly enormous tiger appeared, coming over a small knoll about 30 yards in front of me. He was moving at a brisk walk, and although I had been warned by experienced hunters never to fire at a tiger in a beat until he was abreast of the machan, I was too excited to wait, and when he was about 20 yards away, I drew a bead on his shoulder and fired. The tiger sprang like a flash into the nala between us and reappeared a second later, coming obliquely towards me. I had tried to reload, but my very old single-barrel .405 rifle had jammed, and now there was the tiger standing only about 5 yards from me. He was in a towering rage, and with every nerve tensed and every muscle braced, was looking for his assailant. But by the grace of God, he did not see me. Beside me in the machan was my shotgun, loaded with spherical ball, but I knew instinctively that if I moved even a finger, the tiger would see me and instantly tear me to pieces. If my rifle had not jammed, I could have shot him through the head. As it was, I could do absolutely nothing. He must have stood there right in front of me for 2 or 3 seconds, but to me it seemed like half an hour. Fortunately for me, at that precise moment, a stop on my left suddenly lost his nerve and decided to scramble a bit higher up his tree. This movement immediately caught the tiger's eye. With a roar of rage, he bounded forward, leaving me still trembling with the useless rifle in my hands. What followed was a wonderful display of rage. Roaring furiously, he sprang at the man in the tree, but fortunately did not reach him. Then, still roaring with rage, he broke back at full gallop towards the beaters, disappearing into the jungle without giving me the chance of another shot. I shouted till I nearly burst my lungs, trying to warn the beaters. Fortunately, all had climbed up trees. When Darbari arrived a few minutes later, his experienced eye immediately traced the exact line the tiger had taken in coming towards me. Standing in front of me, where the tiger had stood, he said, "Where's the tiger?" I told him I thought I had missed. "But," said he, "how could you possibly have missed? The tiger was here, where I am standing now, only a few feet from you." When I explained what had happened and how my rifle had jammed, he fairly fumed with rage and told me in the plainest language what a fool I was to keep on using such a rotten old rifle. And then, calming down a bit, he said, "Sahib, I cannot understand why the tiger did not kill you. You were completely at his mercy." Never in my life had I been so ticked off by a jungly hunter, but I realized there was truth, and nothing but truth in every word he had said. Hitherto, remembering always the saying about bad carpenters, I had refrained from blaming the old rifle, but Darbari was right. Had I not, in his presence, missed the first shot at a huge tiger on the banks of the Waiganga River, and then made a low shot at a leopard, and then again hit a sapling instead of a tigress? And now I had missed a huge tiger just a few yards away. A truly shocking record. Considering the fact that I had been chosen to shoot at Bisley for my school, and was still considered a marksman in my regiment, there did seem to be something wrong somewhere. I promised faithfully never to use that rifle again. But to return to the tiger and the beaters. My shot, followed by the roaring, had sent the beaters helter-skelter to the treetops. Many said they had seen the tiger after he broke back, while some said he was wounded and leaning over to one side. Others said he was moving normally. This had to be checked up, so we ordered the beaters back to a rendezvous, while the shikaris and I proceeded to follow up the trail to look for blood. There was none. The tiger had escaped unscathed. The sun had set and darkness was overtaking us. It was Christmas next day, and I had organized an entertainment for that evening. A man had gone to Jabalpur for fireworks. Cartloads of firewood had been purchased for a bonfire, and gallons of toddy had arrived from Lamta. The stage was set, and a general invitation had been issued to all my jungly friends. But the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. I was having my afternoon tea when a man ran in to tell me that a tiger had killed a bison. He did not seem to know full details, but apparently a woman from his village, 2 miles away, had been out gathering wood in the forest and had come across the kill. This was wonderful news. I set off at once. On arrival at the village, a young Aboriginal woman confirmed the story, and to my surprise, even volunteered to guide us to the kill. She then said the kill was a bison calf. She was only about 4 feet high. I felt like a giant walking behind her as she led the way. Before entering the jungle, she hitched up her skirt to look rather like a pair of shorts, and discarding her cloth headdress, wound it round her waist. It was an eye-opener to me how she picked her way for a mile or more through the dense jungle, moving as silently as a cat, and led us straight to the very spot. On arrival there, we were greeted with a terrific snort, and before we could recover from the shock, were nearly swept off our feet by a charging bison. It was the mother of the calf keeping guard over her dead baby. Actually, I do not believe she meant to charge us seriously. She swerved off at the last moment and did not repeat the charge, but she certainly succeeded in giving us a fright. This little excitement over, we looked all around for the dead calf, but could find it nowhere. It had been removed from where our girl guide had last seen it. There was a good deal of blood, but no calf. To our astonishment, we found it eventually about 10 feet from the ground, hanging in the fork of a tree. It was a very young calf, and must have been killed while on its own, probably when its mother had gone to drink at a neighboring pool or stream. It was getting late, and our guide asked permission to go. When I thanked her and pressed a couple of silver rupees into her hand, she bowed her thanks, and without more ado started running towards the village, through that dark, dense jungle all alone. Do not think that we were being unchivalrous. It would have been an unforgivable breach of jungle etiquette to send a man to escort her home. A closer examination of the bison calf and other clues convinced us that the killer was a leopard. It looked as though the cow bison had returned soon after the calf had been killed, and had chased the leopard away before he had had time to eat more than a very small portion of his kill. Then, I imagine, the leopard had lured her away from the dead calf by showing himself at a safe distance and inviting her to chase him, which apparently she had done. Then he had slunk back and jumped with the calf in his mouth into the fork of a tree, a remarkable feat of strength, for the calf must have weighed about 150 pounds. We were now confronted with the problem of getting rid of the old bison, who would otherwise remain in the vicinity and do her best to keep the leopard away. It would have been extremely unsporting to shoot her, and the shot would in any case have scared the leopard away. The best solution would have been a goat, but the village was too far off to get a goat in time. The sun was about to set, and we were up against time. Finally, we pulled the calf out of the tree and dragged it about 100 yards into a clearing, where we pegged it down to a wooden stake, hoping that the leopard would follow up the drag. A rough perch of branches was hastily put up in a tree for me to sit on, and when this had been well camouflaged with leafy branches, I took up my position and the others departed, talking loudly, hoping to impress the leopard that everyone had gone away. The sun had set, and complete darkness soon enshrouded the jungle. 2 hours rolled slowly by. My legs were aching with cramp through having to sit absolutely still, and the rough branches I was sitting on were making life seem hideous. There had been no sounds of conflict between the bison and leopard. I could see absolutely nothing in the pitch darkness of the night, and wondered whether the leopard would have enough sense of smell to follow the drag, or whether I was just sitting there like a fool, while a bonfire, fireworks, and my guests were probably waiting for me to return. I had almost decided that I could bear my tortures no longer, when I heard the rattle of a piece of wood being dragged along the ground. Pointing my gun in the direction of the kill, I switched on my torch. The calf was gone. In dismay, I swung the light from side to side, and to my joy, found the leopard a few yards away to the left, sitting quite calmly with the calf in its mouth. The torch did not seem to worry him in the very least, and he gave me an extremely easy shot. I used a lethal bullet from my shotgun, and he never moved an inch. In fact, he did not even release his hold, but died with the calf in his mouth. Hearing my shot, my men soon arrived, and in a few minutes we were all racing back to camp, complete with Leopard. Over 100 guests had arrived. The bonfire was lit, the toddy passed round, and then came the fireworks, the likes of which had never been seen before by my very simple friends. The rockets and Catherine wheels thrilled them, but the crowning joy of all was a spark-emitting grenade, which got going too quickly and went scooting along the ground into the midst of the spectators, who up and fled in all directions. The joy this caused was phenomenal. Darbari and Sakhtu had never seen a town before, and asked me to take them with me to Jabalpur next day. I was on the headquarters staff there, and on my return found it had fallen to my unfortunate lot to write the orders for the big New Year's Day parade. This used to be one of the biggest ceremonial functions of the year, at which all troops in the garrison took part. After being inspected in review order, units marched past the saluting base in order of their army precedents, while massed bands played their regimental marches and big guns boomed a salute. While drafting orders for this ceremony, the devil entered my soul. I ordered something that had never been done in Jabalpur before. I ordered the cavalry to reform after marching past, and with squadrons in line to gallop past the saluting base. On the great day, Darbari and Sakhtu looked very self-conscious in their new khaki clothes I had provided them with, and were escorted to the special enclosure near the saluting base. There, for the first time in their lives, they saw troops on parade, heard big guns booming, and heard a military band. They told me afterwards they had no idea there was a large and a wonderful army in India. But the thing that impressed them most was the cavalry charge. What the cavalry officers said later about my orders does not bear repeating. I received their caustic remarks in humble silence, and in all humility expressed the opinion that the charge had been excellently executed. No one ever knew that the lancers, with pennons flying, had galloped past purely for the benefit of two insignificant little aborigines from the remote jungles of Lamta. Just a word about my old .405 rifle. I had bought it second-hand for 60 rupees. The previous owner had assured me it was accurate, and I had taken his word for it, with the result that it nearly cost me my life. A test on the rifle range later proved that 50% of the shots went very wide of the mark. The barrel was very worn. The mechanism was very worn too, which accounted for the rifle jamming. It should have been scrapped a long time ago. Moral: never go after dangerous game with a rifle you have not tested yourself. There is an old saying, you cannot buy hummingbirds for 4 pence. I had no ground for complaint, though. I had bagged 2 tigers and a leopard with the old rifle, and it had provided me with thrills that money could not buy. The end.